committee. Good morning, National Treasury team. Members of the media on the platform and members of the public on the platform. Good morning to all of you. Today we are interacting with National Treasury following the MTBBS presented by the Minister of Finance last week. So we'll do it this way. They will brief us on the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill and on the Adjustment Appropriation Bill. Then after that, we'll take the comments, the inputs, and generally the members, the oral members will be able to interact with both the presentations. And then after that, we'll go to the second quarter expenditure report. So that's how we'll do it. It's quite a long day, but I know we're used to that. So who's leading Team Treasury?
Good morning, Chairperson and honorable members. This is Mampu Modise, Public Finance. I'm with Mayor Mediation Role, who is responsible for IGR. So both of us will be leading the different teams. Thank you, Chair.
Dr. Mampo, Madam Mediation, thank you very much. So we'll start to see. I will start with the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill. Madam Mediation, please start, and let's see how far we go. And then after
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Chair. I'm hoping that the presentation will be flight for me to go through it. But thank you very much, and good morning to the members of the committee. Okay, so I'm trying to check if the presentation will be, or are we?
I don't know what arrangement you are making. Darren?
Oh, I think we have submitted it. We thought normally. Ngani, maybe you can help me to put up the presentation.
Chairperson, I've made as Mabijang the co-host, so I don't know if you want me to flight it or what.
Good morning, Chairperson, and good morning, honorable members and colleagues. Elelwam Matladi will be flighting the presentation from our side. So if maybe you can allow her to be able to flight the presentation. Thanks.
Chairperson, I'm looking for this person's name. Is it?
It's fine. I'm waiting for you. It's okay.
But I don't see the person's name here on the.
Good. If I may, Chairperson, it's Cindy.
Please, Cindy.
Darren, it is Ellie Wong Matlali. It's just under Dubeni Wong. There we go. And then, sorry, Chairperson, if I may, maybe for the next presentation, also make Mampo Modise the co-host so that we don't waste the committee's time, because we know we've got quite a limited time. Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, so I can go ahead now.
Please, yeah. Okay.
And present, but I'm not able to put it on flights for some reason. So the presentation will cover the overview of the 2021 Division of Revenue Bill. which will look at provincial allocation changes and changes in local government and changes in gazettes that allocations. And we'll also look at the 2022 Division of Revenue in the MTBPS. So I will go through a few slides, but my colleague Bongani Daga and Letsepa Pakis will also assist me with the rest of the slides. Yeah, so what we are demonstrating here is really around what the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill is trying to accomplish. So we tabled the Division of Revenue Bill together with the grant framework in February. And when it was processed into an act, there were separations. So the Division of Revenue Act only includes the clauses of the act and the transfers. And the rest are gazetted in a gazette that then gets issued immediately after the Division of Revenue Bill is passed through Parliament. So now the Division of Revenue Bill, which essentially picks up any adjustment allocation that has been done in terms of Section 32 of the PFMA, is going to then indicate what adjustments we are making. And this is what we are reflecting in terms of how you will see the changes in the bill. So the first table indicates that the Schedule 1 from the Division of Revenue Act indicates 3-year allocations, with column 1 indicating the current year allocation. So what we are doing with the Division of Revenue Bill adjustments, we are now expanding column 1, which is the current year's allocations, to indicate the current years and to indicate in the next column how much we are adding and the total. Or this is all just for transparency purposes and to ensure that we know where we are. So I will allow Daga to Bongani to go through the rest of the changes that we are reflecting in the bill.
Okay, thanks, Member Dijeng. Good morning, Honorable Chairperson, honorable members of the committee and colleagues. So I will be taking you through the changes for the provincial changes. So in terms of the changes that were made in here for the provincial government, there was money in the tune of 14.7 billion that was added. And this was to assist provinces to respond to the wage agreement that was made for the 2020-21 financial year. And this money has been added through the provincial equitable share. However, we are aware that there is some COE that is also in the provincial conditional grants. And given that this funding was calculated based on the head counts, provinces will decide if there is a shortfall in the conditional grants, how they will move money from the equitable share to the provincial conditional grants. There was also, during the main budget in February, the Minister of Finance announced there was an allocation of about 11 billion that was set aside for the public employment program. Subsequent to that, sector departments applied for funding for that, and funding was approved. Can we please go to the next slide, slide 7? So in terms of the funding that was approved through the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative, there is funding that is approved through the provincial equitable share and a conditional grant. So for the education sector, about 60 billion was approved. And this is for the employment of education assistants and general school assistants for public ordinary schools and public special schools. And schools will appoint this assistance based on their need and the specific duties that they want this assistance to perform. And for the health sector, there is also an amount of about 350 million that has been approved for the employment of staff and assistant nurses. And this will be, some of their responsibilities will be for responding to the COVID and the high care wards, and also any other duties that they are currently performing. So this money will be allocated through the provincial equitable share. The other addition that was made was for the social development, where 120 million was added, and this is for contracting of social workers as part of a short-term response to unemployment among the social workers. And this money is added through the provincial equitable share. Further funding that was added was through the early childhood development grant, where about 178 million was added to support the unemployment risk of 70,000 early childhood development related workers. And this is those that have been impacted by the COVID-19 lockdown. And this is meant to supplement their income. Going to the next slide, due to some unforeseen challenges for the funding that has been approved through the budget facility for infrastructure, the project sponsors have requested that we reduce funding for the current financial year so that the funding can be able to match with the projects that they are currently implementing. And then the reductions that have been made are for the National Health Insurance Indirect Grant for the Limpopo Academic Hospital, where a reduction of 150 million has been affected due to the delays in the projects. And the other grant that has been affected is the Health Facility Revitalization Grant, where 10 million has been reduced for the hospital in the Western Cape. And this is due to the delays in the appointment of professional service for professional service providers who are going to design the buildings.
Madam Jeng.
And then in terms of the other changes that have been made, there is a rollover of for the completion of projects in Limpopo. Yes, Chair.
Can you please repeat the slide? We lost you you were inaudible. Just repeat. Start from the beginning. The slide.
Oh, sorry, Chair. I've switched off my video. Maybe it's affecting my bandwidth.
That's so much better.
Yes, Chair. So I was indicating that there are projects that were approved through the budget facility for infrastructure, and these projects were delayed for various reasons. And the project sponsors have requested that we reduce the allocations for these projects in year, and the grants that were affected were the National Health Insurance Indirect Grant for the Limpopo Academic Hospital, where a reduction of 150 million was done. And the other one is the Health Facility Revitalization Grant, where 10 million was reduced for a hospital in the Western Cape. And this was as a result of the delays in the appointment of professional service providers for designing of the building. And then I was moving over to the rollover of that was approved of 210 million for the school infrastructure backlog grant for completions of projects in the sanitation appropriate for education initiative, where this rollover is approved for Eastern Cape, Free State, KwaZulu-Natal, and Limpopo. And then there was also there is also a 97 million that is reprioritized from the school infrastructure backlog grant from the goods and services portion allocated to the National Department of Basic Education. That was for planning and oversight of the grant, where savings were realized as a result of COVID restriction. And then this funding will be used by the Department of Basic Education to fund the shortfall in the workbooks program. This is as a result of the increased demand in the workbooks as a result of the schools implementing rotational timetables and the social distancing. So some learners have to work on their own from home. And then there is money that is reprioritized in the tune of 243 million for the medical interns. And this is reprioritized from the various components of the National Health Insurance Grant to the Human Resource and Training Grant. This is due to the shortfall is due to more interns graduating. So there was a need for more funding. We can go to slide number 9. In terms of this slide, there were funds that have been converted from the person service component of the National Health Insurance Grant to the HIV, TB, malaria, and community outreach grant. This is due to provinces having demonstrated that they are ready to take on the mental health and oncology services. So an amount of 167 million has been converted for that purpose. And then there is also, in terms of the EPW, the Expanded Public Works Program, for a department in the Northern Cape, after the minister had gazetted the have gazetted the allocation in terms of section 15, we were made aware that 2 departments had merged. So here we are correcting for that name change so that the 2 departments become one. So this table is just showing the changes that I have talked to, which whereby we see for the equitable share, there is an addition of about 21 billion, and for the direct conditional grant, it's about 579 million. I will hand over to my colleague to take us through the other slides. Let's see.
Itsipa coming.
Good morning, Chairperson. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if you can see my face. It's just blank on my side.
We are seeing the slide.
You're seeing the slide.
Okay, you can continue.
Okay. I dressed all up for you, honorable members, but I will live with that. So in terms of the local government grants allocation, so there were quite a number of changes, and I think one related to the changes in the BFI. So where I think we've been in contact with the city of Cape Town in regards to their readiness to roll out the My City public transport network program. And they indicated to us that they would like to revise their cash flow because of I think this current financial year, there's just so much that they can do due to the capacity constraints. So as a result, they won't be needing an amount to the tune of 1.3 billion in the current financial year. Then we have moved to then reduced that allocation to them. But this, honorable members, is not a loss to the local government or to the municipality itself. It's just rescheduling, so aligning the plans of the city with the allocation. So over the MTF, depending on how the city is progressing with its rollout, the money will be brought back to the city. There was also an additional amount of 81 million that was added to one of the grants for local government, the Regional Bulk Infrastructure Grant. And this was really an additional allocation to George Municipality to fund potable water security and remedial works project there. The honorable member also just note that the BFI is by nature an application-based funding mechanism. So the municipality applied, and then due diligence was done, and then they are being provided with funding for that too. And obviously, this 81 million would be below the threshold for the BFI, but I just want the honorable members to note that this is just for this financial year, so there are also provisions that are being made over the MTF period. Another change, really, which was greatly appreciated in the local government space, related to the presidential youth employment intervention, where we saw an amount to the tune of 841 million that was added to one of the grants, the Neighborhood Development Grant. It's really to fund the city-led employment programs. So the cities are being encouraged to ramp up their employment programs, and this is in line with what the president has announced. But also, I think it really then comes in at an opportune time for local government when unemployment and the people displaced by COVID have been struggling for employment opportunities. So we're hoping there that this will really also assist the city in terms of its revenue, increasing its revenue base as well. We have also implemented a reprioritization within this grant, which is the Neighborhood Development Partnership Grant, to the tune of 90 million. So this amount was shifted from some municipalities. I think in the main, I think about 50 million was shifted from the city of Cape Town. And also here, the issue, honorable members, is that there were some projects that were not getting off the ground. So instead of the funds being returned to the fiscus at the end of the financial year, so the city has decided, listen, it does have some projects that it can undertake, but then there's just projects that it cannot do this financial year. So again here, then the funds were then shifted to those municipalities that needed some technical assistance, to then capacitate them. There's also a rollover, which I think the honorable members will all appreciate, to the tune of 582 million to assist Umfuleni local municipality, as they try and solve, the issues in the Vaal River in terms of pollution and remediation projects there. Here, honorable members, is just a table that shows all these changes that I've spoken to. So as you can see, the biggest change is in the public network grant, where from an allocation of 6.5 billion to the city, an amount of 1.3 billion is being reduced, is being rescheduled. If I can move to the next slide. Honorable members, I think Member Lijeng has already spoken about some of the changes in terms of the gazette that will make once this amendment bill has been enacted. And this is really founding its base from section 14 of the Division of Revenue Act, which requires that we consult with yourselves in terms of all the proposed changes in the grant frameworks, for the purposes of correcting an error or an omission. So once the bill has been enacted, then I think the next move from us will then gazette those changes. And in my next slide, I then start to talk about the specific frameworks where there were adjustments made. The first one would be the Integrated Urban Development Grant, which is managed by the Department of Cooperative Governance. And there, honorable members, the change that we've made is the inclusion of the purchasing of special vehicles for waste management. And honorable members would know that the municipalities that are currently within this grant are coming from the Municipal Infrastructure Grant, and there's a great relationship there. So if municipalities struggle within this a new grant, then they go back to the MIC. So it was quite important that the provisions that they enjoyed in the MIC, which includes the purchasing of special vehicles, are also reflected in terms of this new grant that they fund themselves in. So Salt Lake was one of those municipalities that required that we consider this change. So we have then since made that amendment. And then in the Municipal Infrastructure Grant, honorable members, there was a small omission of the past performance section of the grant, where we're supposed to have inserted a 14.8 billion to signal the amount of money that was spent within the MIC grant. However, there was an omission, so we had only, I think, put an X there. So we're also correcting for that. I think the honorable members would also be aware that the presidential employment program that this grant received the money for also has additional conditions that were not originally planned for in the grant. So we're making that provision now to include the conditions that require now that these cities really ramp up their employment programs in line with what has been envisaged through this program. And we're also, the honorable members would know that the BEP, what we call the BEP, which is the Built Environment Performance Plans, have been in the system for quite a while, but now they are being phased out. So we have also just removed that reference now to the BEP in this grant. And then quite lastly on this one, honorable members, I've spoken about the additional funding that goes to the George municipality. It was quite important then that we also add conditions that are specific to the municipality for the purposes of the BFI. The honorable members would know that the BFI started to bring some sort of blended finance a mechanism where it requires the city to co-fund, and then there's also a need for cost-benefit analysis, and there's also really just a need for them to then submit some signed co-funding agreements, especially with the sector departments that they also want to use their plans for these purposes. Honorable members, I'm going to move now with your permission to the 22 Division of Revenue, as well presented in the MTBBS. And what we are seeing really here is government's commitment to fiscal consolidation, and there's a decline in the annual average growth of 1.8% from the national coffers, but also what we have seen is that the other subnational spheres of government, so your provincial and local government, are enjoying some sort of some increases over the MTF, especially the local government, where resources really they increase by 4.1%, which is something that was quite welcome at our budget forum meeting late last month. But then we also note that there are some spending, there are no spending reduction that have been proposed yet. So hence we're seeing those healthy growths there, and there's also a relative, allocation increases over the MTF in terms of the provinces to the tune of 15.7 billion when you compare to the indicative allocation that the provinces had the previous time when we presented to you, honorable members. And I think also in the same vein, there's an increase of about 1 billion towards local government from the indicative allocation that we presented in the 2021 budget. Perhaps, also what could be welcomed in terms of the budget forum discussions that we had was now, there is a slight increase in terms of the percentage that goes to local government. So it has increased from the 9.4%. It is now at 9.7%. But I think also still alarming is that the debt service costs, they really are just half of the provincial allocations, and they are actually, almost double the local government allocation, which does mean then, that it remains an area that has to be addressed. Next, I think I will pause here, honorable members, and then invite Bongani to continue with the provincial changes before I come back again on the local government related changes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Letsep. And honorable members, I'll be presenting on the changes over the 2022 MTF. And as previously, we have been communicating with the committee that we are currently in the process of reviewing the provincial equitable share formula. That work is ongoing, and we recently completed the review of the health component, whereby we were reviewing the risk-adjusted index. And the implementation of that reviewed health component will start from next financial year, which is 2020, 22, 23. And given the impact of that change, there is going to be a special 3-year phase-in of the impact of that changes to the health component. And going forward, we are still going to be doing the review of the provincial equitable share, where we are going to focus on the education component. And honorable members, there was also function shifts that were approved. The one of the function shifts was for the agriculture colleges, whereby they are being moved from provinces to national. And this implies that the funding for the agricultural colleges will be taken out of the comprehensive agriculture support program. But it's only that funding. The grant itself still remains. The other function shift that was approved was for the early childhood development to be moved from the Department of Social Development to the Department of Basic Education. We can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of this slide, we are showing the changes in terms of the structure of the provincial conditional grants. Over the years, for the HIV, TB, and community outreach program, the Department of Health has been adding some components, and this grant now is too big and is being restructured so that it can only have 2 components. The one being the comprehensive HIV/AIDS component that is going to be funding HIV, AIDS, and TB. And the second component is going to be the district health component that is going to be funding the other components that are remaining. That includes COVID, HPV, and then community outreach, amongst others. And also, we want to inform the committee that other two components that were within this grant, which is the oncology services and mental health, are being moved out of this grant to the direct NHI. And these two components were introduced in the 2021 MTEF. And as I previously, when I was talking about the in-year changes, indicated that provinces showed the readiness to take over these services. The services were both funded in this HIV grant and then the indirect NHI. So even funding from the indirect NHI is going to be moved to the direct NHI. Moreover, there are funds that we have reprioritized from the indirect NHI again to the grant, the Human Resource and Training Grant, that funds for the medical interns, and this was due to the increasing number of medical interns that are graduating. So we had to find money for that. And then also for the provincial roads maintenance grant, when we came to the committee during the main budget, we did indicate that from the speech of the minister that will be working with the National Department of Transport to look at the way that the incentive component of this grant is being allocated. And that work is still ongoing. Therefore, in terms of the from the baseline, we are going to remove that incentive component for the 2022-23 financial year while the work is ongoing, given that for the previous couple of financial years, that has been allocated using the main PRNG formula, which the committee was not happy with. And then there is also going to be about 65 million that is going to be reprioritized for the system that collects data. That data is going to be centralized data. Over to you, Letsepa, and thank you very much, committee members.
Thanks, Bongani, and thanks again, Honorable Chairperson and Honorable members. Yeah, I just have one slide to take you through some of the proposed changes to the structure of local government grants. One would, the first one, maybe just, okay, maybe before I go there, Chair, let me just say, there's been one of those budgets where, the performance of local government has centered, I think it took center stage in all the discussions that were being held, with national seemingly, wanting to give up on local government and just introducing as many indirect grants as possible in the system, which is something that would have been unfortunate because, we do need to continue to support the local government sphere. But what you're seeing here is a combination of really intense discussions, and there really is, I think, limited space or scope that was allowed for any indirect grants. So what we're seeing here, which is an indirect grant, of course, is the Municipal Systems Improvement Grant, where this grant in the previous budget, honorable members would remember that we had introduced I think the concept of funding the DDM from this grant was introduced, and at the time it was funding a quarter of the support plans, for the DDM. And now the whole grant has been repurposed for the purposes of assisting, with this new DDM approach to service delivery, and I think I need to stress that it doesn't change the deliverables per se. but it's just how it's been framed, because the areas that were always a focus of this grant would remain funded from it as well. But then there's also just some realignment in terms of some of the overlaps that we found between, for instance, this grant and the financial management grant as it relates to revenue management value chain. So yeah, so that's just that a realignment there. There's a creation of an indirect component of the MIC. This proposal, honorable members, is aimed at really improving the efficiency. This grant is one of the biggest grants to local government, and then it goes to non-metropolitan municipalities, and there's quite a number of those that are experiencing service delivery challenges, and although I think on average this grant spends about 90%, but that I think that percentage really masks huge differences with other municipalities really struggling to spend, and hence this proposal to then create this indirect component. So the conversion would then be done in year. So in the 2022-23 financial year, it would then be converted for some of the municipalities. It would be converted to an indirect. Of course, this, honorable members, is aimed to try and assist in terms of service delivery. So it's not envisaged that municipalities that have commitments would be impacted, but it is those that are struggling. Hence, the criteria is still under discussion that would be used to determine the municipalities whose allocations would be converted to an indirect component. So the Department of Cooperative Governance is leading the SALGA. Have been consulted in quite a number of times, and I'm aware there are still some consultations that are still going to take place. We as a Treasury as well are also involved in terms of trying to inform the criteria that would be used to that, so that we are able to better target the right municipalities with this component. This, honorable members, is just a once-off, so call it a pilot, but it's a once-off intervention in 2022-23, and then maybe we will evaluate thereafter how it's working before any decision can be made. The honorable members would also know that for quite a while now, we've been battling with creating or putting incentives in the system that are going to assist us, to improve performance in local government, especially non-financial performance incentives. So we are also proposing to test in this municipal infrastructure grant, of course, some performance-related incentives, especially those that are related to asset management, because I think the last budget forum, the Khotla focused on the infrastructure delivery and asset management value chain. So there was quite a lot there, and there were, that was discussed in terms of just how much of a game changer this would be if we could just get going in terms of improving asset management. Then a lot would then fall in place, because municipalities would then be in a position to service more communities. And I think so we are still in discussion to then in the in-year stopping and reallocation process, which the National Treasury heads, to consider using the performance-related incentives there to then try and reward the municipalities that are doing well in terms of asset management and how that can be improved. And we're in consultation with the colleagues in the Department of Cooperative Governance in terms of how this can be done. That's it from me, Honorable Chairperson and Honorable members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. This is the end of our submission on the Division of Revenue Bill. So we will allow the Division of the Appropriation Adjustment presentation and to.
Okay, thank you, Madam Adjeng.
Thank you.
And your team. Adjustment Appropriation Bill, please come.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. As I said, this is Mampo Modisa from the National Treasury. Chairperson, I think the first thing that we wanted to appreciate from the committee is the fact that for the first time, the committee is hearing the appropriation bill with the Division of Revenue, meaning that the consideration will be much faster than in the previous years. So that is truly appreciated. And the second thing, Chairperson, that National Treasury would like to thank the committee is the consideration to postpone the presentation of the second quarter because we were busy with the budget. So that is also truly appreciated, Chairperson. I'm going to ask my colleague Nompumelelo to just run through the slide quickly so that you can see what the changes are. But basically, Chairperson, these are the changes from the 2021 budget, and it will incorporate unavoidable and unforeseen expenditure, some of the environments that Parliament has to approve, the rollovers, as well as other changes. So Mpumi, please take the committee through the presentation. Thank you, Chairperson.
Dr. Mampo, because before we may proceed, can we see her? Can you please just want to see your video?
Yes, I thought I was on.
Okay.
Am I? Can you see me, Chair?
We can see you now. Thank you, Mahatebe. Then you can proceed.
Thank you so much, Chair. And good morning, honorable members, colleagues, and all the representatives in the meeting. As I've already been introduced, my name is Nompumelelo Khatebe, and I will be taking you through the presentation on the Adjusted Appropriation Bill. So in terms of the presentation outline, Chair, the first few slides are just a recap of, I'm sure, what we already know in terms of the budget process, the parliamentary process that also supports the budget process and the adjustments budget process. And then the later slides, then we go into the detail of the changes to the 2021 budget as included in the 2021 Adjustments Appropriation Bill. So that's essentially what today's presentation will cover. And then just quick.
Ms. Hadebe?
Yes,
so,
Chair?
Sorry to interrupt you. It's just for all the presenters. Just remember that when you are making these presentations, they're not just only made to the honorable members, but there's public out there who is also having an interest in what we are presenting. So don't tire to continue being educational in the process. That's very important. Okay. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Chairperson. So I'll try then to go through some of the detail, I think, for the benefit of everyone who might not be familiar with the process. So in the first few slides, as I've already indicated, it's just a recap of the budget process and the parliamentary process. So on this slide, Chair, we just outline who some of the key role players in the budget process are. So at the level of the legislature, we've got the committee, which we are presenting, the Appropriations Committee. You also have the portfolio committees and the Finance Committee, and then the National Assembly and National Council of Provinces. So those are the role players in terms of considering the budget and approving it as well. And then at the executive level, the political structures that we have in terms of considering the budget. So once all the different budget committees have gone through the recommendations, they get into the political process where, starting off with MinCombat, they will consider the recommendations, and then the recommendations will then go through to cabinet and the extended cabinet for approval. And then just at the technical level, we've got the medium-term expenditure committee, which is a committee made up of directors generals from selected key departments in the center of government. And then the National Treasury is responsible for coordinating the entire budget process. And then in that process, we work with departments and public entities in terms of inputs, budget submissions, and consultation, essentially on the resource allocation process. And then just also important to highlight is that in terms of the Constitution, as well as the Intergovernmental Fiscal Relations Act, we do have other key role players in the form of the Financial and Fiscal Commission. Provinces are also represented in the Budget Council and local government in the Budget Forum, as well as other intergovernmental forums. And all of these bodies that I've just outlined also give inputs into the budget process before we actually finalize the budget. The next slide, Chair, is to just then show a graphic presentation of how all these different role players interact in the formulation of the budget and the resource allocation process. The process generally starts off at the technical level, where the National Treasury would have bilateral meetings with departments and discussions and recommendations from those meetings then feed into the technical group and functional group discussions. And then once the discussions have been exhausted at that level, then the National Treasury, through the function group leaders, will then prepare a report with recommendations to the Medium-Term Expenditure Committee for consideration and further input. And then it will then go through the political process, which is then MINCOMBAT, and then finally to Cabinet and Extended Cabinet. Just maybe to also highlight, Chair, that parallel to this technical process, you also do have the other processes that happen, the performance dialogues, which are led by the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, as well as the 10 by 10 meetings again. And you also have the technical committee on finance that also has meetings and to discuss various inputs at provincial level, and then those also feed into the different budget committees, and ultimately the recommendations that are made in those forums are then tabled to MINCOMBAT and then ultimately cabinet for approval. So this was just to show how the different role players actually interact in the preparation of the budget. And then moving on now, Chair, to the parliamentary process, we just wanted to highlight here, how the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Amendment Act actually outlines what the parliamentary process that should follow once we have done all the work that I have mentioned in the previous slide. So once the Minister of Finance has tabled the National Adjustments Budget, we're just highlighting here, Chair, key provisions in the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act that explain what is the parliamentary process that must follow, starting with section 12.2, which basically outlines that when we table the adjustments budget, we also need to table the Adjustments Appropriation Bill. It must accompany the budget. And then section 12.15 notes that the Adjustments Appropriation Bill has to be accompanied by the revised fiscal framework, which is then referred to this committee. And that happens or should happen after the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill is passed by Parliament. And then section 12.16 just goes through basically what is expected of the committee once they have received the Adjustments Appropriation Bill. So it outlines the role that the committee plays in terms of coordinating the inputs of all the other different committees on proposed amendments to the appropriation bill, the comments, the proposals to amend certain allocations, whether it's in terms of transfer payments, recurrent or capital expenditure. And then on the next slide, further elaborating on that, the section 12.16 also talks about the mediation role that the committee plays in terms of trying to mediate the inputs that are coming through from other committees, but to also make sure that whatever amendments that are proposed must be in line or consistent with the fiscal framework, the adopted Division of Revenue Bill. And they need to motivate in that regard. And then the rest of the sections, Chair just basically talks about once the committee has made its report and proposals, what then happens. So the Minister of Finance is given 4 days to respond to any proposed amendments to the appropriation bill by the committee. And then section 18 just basically outlines what the Appropriations Committee must. It says that it must comply with section 1010 and then include the comments from the Minister of Finance on any of the proposed amendments. So that was just the quick recaps, Chair. So in short, basically what we are saying is that the process, the parliamentary process, is that Parliament will vote first on the fiscal framework and then followed by the Division of Revenue Bill, and then it's the appropriation bill, and that any amendments to the appropriation bill must be consistent with the fiscal framework and the Division of Revenue Bill that has been adopted and passed by Parliament. So in practice, they were just outlining, Chair, that the fiscal framework, it's what provides the resource envelope for government, what the expenditure ceiling is. And then the Division of Revenue basically talks to the distribution of resources across the 3 spheres of government, whilst the appropriation bill then talks to the distribution of resources across the 41 national votes. And then I think very key to highlight, Chair, is that whenever amendments are proposed to allocations for votes in the appropriation bill, it implies that when we add money to one vote, we must be mindful that the money has to come from somewhere. So we also need to indicate which vote must then be reduced in order to make provision for that additional expenditure. Now, in terms of amendments to the appropriation bill, this section is just basically highlighting what the report of this committee to the House that proposes any amendments to the appropriation bill must actually include. So we're just highlighting some of the key points there, but I think of importance to emphasize is that there needs to be a reason for any proposed amendment, but very important is that we also need to show what the implication of the amendment is for the affected vote, both at the vote level as well as the at program level. And then also important is to highlight the impact of any proposed amendment on service delivery. So that's basically what we wanted to highlight on this slide. And then this slide, I won't go through, Chair, in detail, only because the rest of the presentation does get into detail on each of these components of what must be included in an adjustment budget as provided for in section 32 of the Public Finance Management Act. So I go into detail in the next few slides, which is why I will skip this particular slide. And then here again, we're just providing an explanation in terms of what the Adjustments Appropriation Bill provides for, which I've covered in the previous slide. And then I think Mayor Madijeng and the IGR team covered what the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill covers. Just to highlight, Chair, that some of the changes to expenditure that I'm going to highlight in the next few slides. For some of the detail on other changes that may not be included in the presentation, members and everyone in the public is welcome to visit the Treasury website, in particular the Adjusted Estimates of National Expenditure publication, as it does provide the details of changes that are included in the Adjustments Appropriation Bill per vote. So that's very key to highlight. And then the appropriations that govern changes to the expenditure, I'll also touch on in the next few slides. In terms of the structure of the Adjustments Appropriation Bill, again, we just wanted to provide the information for background purposes, but I'll just quickly touch on some of the aspects. Very important is that each and every vote, the information in the bill is provided for each vote. And the information that is provided for the vote includes the purpose of the vote. So what is the mandate and purpose of the particular department. And then the bill is also divided into programs. So for every department or every vote that's included in the bill, you'll also be able to see what the allocation for each of the departments or votes are in terms of program as well. And then because we use the standard chart of accounts, the information will then be in terms of economic classification, which is current payments, transfers and subsidies, payments for capital assets, and then payments for financial assets. So this is just to show, Chair, what the structure of the Adjustments Appropriation Bill is for those who may not have been able to see what it looks like before. So this is the detail that is provided for in the Adjustments Appropriation Bill. And then now, Chairperson, I'm going, and honorable members, I'm moving to the detail of now the adjustments that are there in the 2021 Adjustments Appropriation Bill. This slide just highlights some of the key adjustments that are included in the adjustments budget, starting off with the 32.9 billion, which was allocated through the second special appropriations bill, and that was to respond to the financial implications that resulted from the public violence that we had in Gauteng, mainly in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal in July, and then to also provide the COVID-19 fiscal relief package allocation. So that 32.9 billion was allocated in the second special appropriations bill, which I think we passed in early August. And then the rest of the allocations, increases in other allocations since 2021 budget are what the adjustment budget provides for. So in total, Chair, if you add the allocations that we made in the second special appropriation bill and those that we are making in this adjustments budget, they will amount to 77.3 billion. Those that we are making in this budget are mainly to allocate money for the wage bill adjustments, given that the 2021-22 wage agreement was finalized. So that was additional funding to national and provincial governments for the wage bill in the main. And then also phase 2 of the Presidential Employment Initiative receives an allocation of about 11 billion as part of the adjustments budget. So even though the total is 77.3 billion, that is netted off partially by 17.9 billion, which is basically funds that we utilize from the contingency reserve, what we are projecting in terms of underspending for departments, likely underspending at the end of the financial year as well. So that is how we are partially providing for it. But then the net effect of that is that the change in non-interest expenditure from the 2021 budget would then be 59.4 billion. So that is by how much our budget has increased since the main appropriation budget in February. And then the next slide, Chair and honorable members, is just giving a breakdown of that 32.9 billion that I made reference to, that we allocated through the second special appropriations bill. In the main, the bulk of the allocation went to the social grants edition. Specifically, it was the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant to provide for the extension of the grant from August until the end of March next year. So that's really the main driver of that special allocation. And then the rest of the allocations are mainly now in response to the public violence that we had in July. So we're providing support to small businesses of 2.3 billion, to repair some of the infrastructure that was destroyed during the public violence. And that allocation to small businesses is also partially netted off by the reprioritization from both the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition and the Department of Small Business Development. So they reprioritized 1 billion from within the resources, which is how we partially then funded the 2.3 billion total support that went to businesses. And then the allocations to the South African Police Service and the National Defense force is also to provide for the unforeseen expenses that they had to incur in response to the public violence in July. So essentially, the total fiscal relief package for both COVID-19 and responding to the public violence is then 32.9 billion. And then in terms of the revenue measures, there's the 5 billion that is allocated for the employment tax incentive, which is why then the total fiscal relief package amounts to 37.9 billion. And then, Chair, this slide is just to summarize the changes to the 2021 budget since the main appropriation in February 2021. I've already made reference to the 32.9 billion and what informs that. So that the column adjustments appropriation just basically summarizes all the additions and reductions to spending that we implemented as part of this adjustments budget. And then the next slides, then I will just take you through those particular adjustments in detail. Starting off with the first one, which is significant and unforeseeable economic and financial events. So the funding that was allocated to provincial and national departments to cover the costs associated with the 2021-22 public sector wage agreement, the amount that has been allocated in that regard is 20.5 billion. The bulk of the amount goes to provinces, about 14.7 billion. And then at the national level, the biggest allocation is to the police because of their large personnel establishment. So this slide just basically shows, how much each of the different departments received for the public sector wage agreement. So that's what the allocations for significant and unforeseeable economic and financial events basically provided for. It was for the public sector wage bill. And then moving on to unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure, which is provided for in Section 6(1)(a) of the Appropriation Act. Again, just as a recap to explain what unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure is, this is essentially, Chair, expenditure that could not be anticipated at the time of the budget. So there's no way that we could have known that certain events were going to unfold, which would require government to spend money on them, which is why we then in the adjustments budget make provision for unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure. Treasury Regulation 6.6.1, Chair, specifies what may not be regarded as unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure. And it's essentially expenditure if we knew that certain expenditure was going to materialize at the time of the budget, then we cannot regard that as unforeseen and unavoidable when we are passing the adjustments budget. Also, when it comes to spending increases that are due to tariffs, because if you are providing a service and you know that your tariffs get adjusted every year or every 3 years, again, that's something that you can provide for as part of the main budget. That is why we don't consider that as part of unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure. And then Table 5, Chair and honorable members, just shows what the unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure that was allocated was for. A total of 102.6 million was allocated. Mainly it was to Home Affairs as well as transport. To Home Affairs, it was to the IEC specifically for the procurement of personal protective equipment, whilst to transport, it was allocated to the South African National Roads Agency to provide for the toll revenue loss that they experienced, which was unforeseen and unavoidable, as well as the damage to property. And then in terms of expenditure that was earmarked in the 2021 budget speech, Chair, I must highlight here that the total that has been allocated is about 13.6 billion. 6.5 billion of that is for provinces, and then 7.1 billion went for national government. In the main, these allocations are for the presidential employment initiative. So most of the allocations are actually for the creation of the jobs, the supporting the livelihoods, as well as the catalytic interventions. And then Added to that, which is why the total is not 11 billion, but 13.5 billion, is also the fact that there's an allocation to health of 2.3 billion that is for the purchasing of the vaccines. So this is why the total then is 13.5 billion, but mainly the allocations that were allocated using the money that was earmarked in the 2021 budget speech were essentially for the presidential employment intervention. So the next slide as well just basically provides an outline of some of those allocations to the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, Small Business, Trade, Industry, and Competition and Water and Sanitation. So we've tried to provide the detail in the slide, Chair, in terms of what are the different programs under each department that the money is providing for in terms of the employment programs. And then, as I indicated, 6.5 billion was allocated to provincial government, also for the presidential employment initiative, mainly in the Department of Basic Education for social workers, and then as well as for staff and assistant nurses as well in health. And then in terms of rollovers, Chair, so this is another adjustment that we make as part of the adjustment budget. Again, a recap of a rollover. A rollover is basically money that was unspent in the previous financial year, but which had been contracted for, although the services for some reason could not be rendered in the previous financial year and can only be rendered in the current financial year, which is then why a department would submit a request for a rollover. Rollovers are governed in terms of Treasury Regulation 6.4. And the regulation also restricts what the rollovers can or cannot provide. In the main, we do not roll over funds for compensation of employees because you can't say that the service was not rendered in the previous financial year. So compensation of employees, because it relates to salaries, is restricted. We do not roll over that. The rollovers on goods and services are limited to a maximum of 5%. So we do not roll over more than 5% unless it's a deviation from the regulation. And then the other restrictions are in terms of transfers and subsidies, where we say that they cannot, funds that were allocated for particular transfer to a specific entity for a specific purpose cannot be rolled over for a purpose other than what the funds were originally allocated for. And then for payments for capital assets, funds can only be rolled over to finalize projects or the acquisition of assets already in progress. And then the next slide, Chair, just basically shows which departments were allocated the rollover. In other words, these departments are the ones that submitted the applications for the rollover, which was considered by the Treasury Committee. So this would be for the expenditure that was contracted for in the previous year, but for some other reason, the delivery did not happen in the previous financial year and will only take place in 2021-22. The highest allocation is to the police, and it's mainly due to delays that were caused by COVID. And the bulk of that allocation is for the payment to Polmed for injury on duty cases of police officers who were injured on duty. The other biggest allocation is to water and sanitation, which is to provide for operational payments for the Vaal River pollution remedial project, which has been ongoing for a number of months or years now, I think. And then also to Statistics South Africa in support of the census. So these are the rollovers, Chair. The total allocation is 2.8 billion in terms of what we have rolled over in the budget, in the adjustments budget, and included in the Adjustments Appropriation Bill. And then in terms of self-financing expenditure, so self-financing expenditure, some departments in the course of rendering or executing their mandate do receive revenue as part of their activities, and then as part of the adjustments budget, then they would then make a request to the National Treasury to retain some or all of that expenditure to continue to finance the activities. And the example that we give there is the Department of Home Affairs. Every time we go to get an ID or a passport in the department. We make payment to the department, so therefore the department generates revenue. And then in the adjustments budget, then they apply to Treasury to retain some of that revenue so that they can continue to invest in the provision of the service. So the departments that were given approval to retain some of their self-financing expenditures were GCIS, the Government Communication and Information System, Home Affairs, as I've indicated, Correctional Services, as well as the Department of Defense. So these are the departments that received the approval to retain some of their self-financing expenditure, and the total for that, Chair, amounts to 1.1 billion. And then the other adjustment that also is included in the Adjustments Appropriation Bill is with regards to declared unspent funds. And this is basically the funds that departments already at the point of the adjustments budget know that they will not spend by the end of the financial year. And therefore then, as part of the adjustments budget, they then declare those funds to say that we can reduce their allocation by the same amount. So these are the votes that had declared unspent funds. The biggest allocation or the biggest expenditure that was declared is from transport for the public transport network grant, which I believe is because of a delay of the MyCity project in Cape Town. So these are the funds that the department identify will not be spent in the current financial year because of those delays. Hence, the money was declared as unspent as part of the adjustments budget. So the total declared unspent funds amount to about 2 billion for 2021-22. And then in addition to that, we are also estimating that other departments are most likely going to underspend their budget, and the total that we have projected to be underspent at the end of 2021-22 is about 3.8 billion, Chair. And then there's also the local government repayment to the National Revenue Fund of 2.5 billion, which is why then the total you see on the slide is 8.2 billion. So this is now for the declared unspent funds, the projected underspending, as well as the repayment to the NRF from local government. And then now, Chair, I get into the detail of some of the environments that actually require the legislature's approval, because as the National Treasury, the Minister of Finance is not empowered to approve these environments, and therefore they have to be approved by the legislature. This slide is just basically providing. Yes, Chair.
Okay, you are talking about environments.
Yes.
I guess all members know that, but remember I said you are talking to the public also. Just
yes.
Explain what is that.
Okay. Yes, I was going to do just that, Chair, but thank you so much for emphasizing. So with environments, in the previous slides, I have taken you through some of the adjustments that are provided for in terms of Section 32 of the Public Finance Management Act, and also included in Section 32 is that it also makes provision for the environments or shifting of funds by department. And then Section 43 of the Public Finance Management Act then gets into detail about what are some of the limitations that are associated with environments. Environment, maybe to just explain, Chair, as well, is where a department moves money from one program to another, or sometimes it can be from one economic classification to another economic classification. But you find that in terms of Section 43 of the PFMA or Treasury Regulation 6.3, there are limitations that we set in terms of environments. So some environments can be approved by the accounting officers of departments, whilst for others, they require either the National Treasury's approval or they require Parliament's approval. And the environments that I will be discussing in the slides that follow, Chair, are those that specifically require Parliament's approval. But we also wanted to just highlight in terms of Section 5 of the Appropriation Act that it does make provision that in order to expedite service delivery, the Minister of Finance can also approve some of the environments that you find that either in the PFMA or in the Treasury regulations ordinarily were set to be approved by the legislature. But in the interest of expediting service delivery, then Section 5 of the Appropriation Act does empower the Minister of Finance to approve some of these environments, but not all of them, which is why then those that are still specifically for the legislature to approve, I will then discuss in the next few slides. Just to give an example, Chair, of those environments in terms of Section 5 of the Appropriation Act 2021, that the Minister of Finance is empowered to approve. The Minister of Finance can approve that money from compensation of employees be used within the same vote for transfers and subsidies, but it says specifically for the payment of severance or exit packages. So if a department wants to reduce their allocation for compensation of employees, but is for other purposes other than the payment of severance or exit packages, then that cannot be approved by the Minister of Finance and is what then has to be approved by Parliament. The other environment that the Minister of Finance can approve is in regards to goods and services, where if a department has a shortfall on their allocation for compensation of employees, they can move money from goods and services within that department to compensation of employees, but that requires the approval of the Minister of Finance. Similarly, with transfers and subsidies to other institutions, the Minister of Finance is empowered to approve those environments, increases in transfers and subsidies, and that he approves that they can be used within the same vote. And then for payments for capital assets, again, these can be approved by the Minister of Finance for use elsewhere within the main division or within any program within the same vote. And then similarly for payments for financial assets. But just very important, Chair, to highlight is that then Section 5.2 of the Appropriation Act 2021 sets a limit and says that the Minister of Finance may not approve the use of unspent funds in terms of subsection 1, C, D, or E for compensation of employees. And what this means, Chair, is that even though the Minister can approve changes in transfers and subsidies to other institutions, payments for capital assets, as well as payments for financial assets, if the funds are being shifted for compensation of employees, the Minister of Finance is not empowered to approve those environments, and therefore only Parliament can approve them, which is why then they are included in the slides that I will present shortly. And then in terms of Section 5.3, which is a very key provision, Section 5.3 of the Appropriation Act 2021 says that the sum of unspent funds in any main division of a vote, so in other words, the sum of unspent funds in a program that is approved for shifting to another program, it must not exceed 8%. Where it exceeds 8%, so the Minister of Finance is only empowered to approve up until the 8%. And then if it exceeds 8%, in other words, the department is moving more than 8% from one program to another, then that can only be approved by the legislature as part of the adjustments budget. And again, I will show some of those instances where departments are moving more than 8%. So that was the background, Chair. I hope I was clear in explaining what is environment and how the committee and the legislature specifically becomes involved in the process. And then the next few slides, Chair, is just to show some of those environments that specifically do require approval by Parliament. I just mentioned now the issue of where the money that is being moved is above 8%. The example in vote 8, which is National Treasury in Program 3, they are moving a total of 11.7% from Program 3 to Programs 3, 6, and to Program 3 and 6. So essentially, because the environment where they are moving the funds from is above 8%, that then requires the approval of Parliament. And then for basic education, they are moving money from a grant, which is specifically and exclusively appropriated, which is then why this particular environment requires the approval of Parliament. So all the environments that require the approval of Parliament, Chair and honorable members, I've tried to circle so that you can specifically see which ones specifically require the approval. And then for higher education and training, I mentioned in the summary slide that if you are moving money from compensation for any other purpose than for the payment of severance packages, then you need the approval of Parliament, which is why in the case of higher education, and training, we have highlighted this environment because it does require the approval of Parliament. It's an amount of 65 million that is being vied from Program 4, and then it goes to Program 3, to the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. And then for health, Chair, there are several of the environments that require Parliament's approval. Mainly is just changes to allocations for the grants. So they are moving money in the main from indirect grants, which are provided for under goods and services, to the direct grants that are provided for under transfers and subsidies. So mainly the National Health Insurance Indirect Grant, the various components of that grant. The Department of Health is moving money from the indirect component to the direct component, which is why it requires the approval of Parliament. And then if you also zoom into Program 2, Chair, the total that they are moving is about 23%, which is above the 8%. Again, it requires the approval of Parliament. I won't go through the detail of all of them. I just wanted to just demonstrate using a few examples why some of these environments actually require Parliament's approval. In the case of the Department of Justice, again, it's an environment that's above 8%, which is why it requires the approval of Parliament. And then we've got several others. Police, they are moving money from construction and upgrading of police stations, so buildings and other fixed structures. This amount is specifically and exclusively appropriated, which is why the Minister of Finance cannot approve it, and only Parliament can approve this environment. And the 1 million to the Aid Subsidy Education Trust is also highlighted. So again, Chair, for communication and digital technologies, it's an environment above 8%, which is why it requires the approval of Parliament. For Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries, they are moving money from the grants, which is why, as I indicated earlier, which are specifically and exclusively appropriated, and that's why these environments would require the approval of Parliament. And then for mineral resources and energy, it's also environments from funds that are specifically and exclusively appropriated, which is why they require the approval of Parliament. Same with the Department of Science and Technology. The environments are from specifically and exclusively appropriated funds, or those items where the Minister of Finance is not empowered to grant approval. Hence, we have included them here, Chair. Small business is environment above 8% in Program 1, which is why it requires approval. And then the same for tourism. And then I think the last one, Chair, is trade, industry and competition. They've got several environments that are above 8%, which is why then they require Parliament's approval. So that's basically, Chair, just a summary of the main changes to the 2021 budget as it was presented in February that we have included in the Adjustments Appropriation Bill, which we tabled last Thursday. And then this slide just basically summarizes what the consolidated government expenditure picture is like for 2020-21, given these changes, but specifically at the function level. And what you will note here, as Chair, is that the allocation to learning and culture, it's learning and culture still receives the bulk of the allocation. In fact, I think if we added the social wage as a whole, we will notice that it's still quite a substantial portion of the budget that is going towards the social wage. And that is what essentially we wanted to highlight on this particular slide. I think that concludes my presentation, Chair and honorable members. Thank you very much to everyone for your attention.
Dr. Mampo, anything?
Thank you, Chairperson. I think this is it from our side. Thank you.
Okay, honorable members, let me give you about 10 minutes to stretch, and then let's come back with our questions. Bongani phela.
Siyabonga, Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, let's stretch.
Recording stopped.
I've just got calls from some members. They got disconnected and they're still trying to, others are still trying to reconnect, okay? But let me see, Honorable Matafa. Are you still there?
I'm here, Chair. Can I proceed?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. No, I think the disconnection is caused by the weather. And if you allow me, can I also engage with my video off in order to protect the connection that I have for the time being?
Please do, Honorable Matafa.
Thank you very much, Chair. Greetings to yourself and to the National Treasury team as led by Dr. Mampo and Mary Jane. Thank you for the presentations. And also thank you for being consistent in providing us with updates as far as financial developments are happening in the country, as well as keeping us updated on the expenditure as requested in our previous meetings. Chair, the first point, and I think maybe it's something that deals with something that has been in the public space for quite some time, which speaks to the issues of the military veterans. I see on slide 22, there is a 50 million projected underspending on the military veterans benefits. Can we maybe be abreast as a committee? What allocation is this? What does it include? And also, can it be the source of the complaints that we see on national TV about military veterans not being happy, about them not being looked after, and where they blame the country for not making necessary allocations for them to be assisted? Because if there is an underspending, yet those that are aimed to benefit from such allocations are complaining, then I think then there is a problem there. The second point, Chair, is on the underspending generally, as far as conditional grants are concerned. Now, the question there, Chair, is if whether are there any measures that the National Treasury is putting in place to assist these departments as well as municipalities, particularly as it relates to issues of roads, issues of education, issues of health, to assist these municipalities to be able to spend. It is worrying, Chair, because if you, for example, go to areas like the city of Tshwane, where I come from, probably we can say it's a maintenance issue, but the conditions of the roads that you drive in are not impressive, but yet there are monies that are not being spent, and in some instances are returned back to the National Treasury. For me, that is something that I'm interested to know. What is National Treasury doing to assist these particular municipalities? And if it's an issue of capacity as far as those that are employed there, is there anything from National Treasury that can be done to ensure that those particular skills that are required are generated at that particular level? Again, Chair, on the issue of transport or roads, we see there's under the Adjustments Appropriation Bill, there is a declared unspent funds of 1.9 billion on the public transport network grant, which again, it's a concern because we all know that public transport is one of the key economic drivers. So we just wanted to find out what is the view of Treasury in terms of what seems to be the issue with this grant. Why is it not being spent? And if Treasury has tried to understand what measures are being put in place to ensure that the situation is corrected. And I think, Chair, on the same grant, if I'm not mistaken, I just want to confirm on my notes, there is a correction of an over-allocation for the same grant in the city of Cape Town. As I'm saying, Chair, I'm speaking under correction, but if that is the case, I just want to find out from National Treasury, how did that happen? Because my understanding is that when grants are being allocated, there would have been business plans that are presented, or at least some sort of a process that would have been initiated indicating that once these grants are received, they will be allocated in these particular areas. So that over-allocation, how did it come about and what has been done in order to prevent such from happening? Chair, on the state-owned entities, I'm just interested to find out on SAPO, the post office. In our interaction with the National Treasury in the past couple of months, I raised a question in terms of why is it that under the COVID-19 pandemic, those that are in the business of moving goods and services around are actually turning up a profit, but SAPO is still showing a loss, but it's also operating in the same space. So now the question there is to find out if whether the restructuring and repurposing of SAPO, will it involve making it fit for purpose and modernizing it to the point at which it's able to compete with those that are operating in the private space? Because Chair, it is very easy for one to walk into these private entities and have parcels and even letters sent off as compared to walking into the post office. So I would prefer that if there is a restructuring process, it should look at that particular issue in terms of modernizing it so that it is also attractive for people to be able to use it. And one of the burning issues, Chair, and it's persisting until today, it's the payment of SMMEs within 30 days. As it is a commitment that is made by government, because we know that cash flow is a very important imperative in keeping any business afloat. So not paying suppliers in 30 days is a problem, and this matter keeps on rearing its head on a continuous basis. What is the current status as far as that is concerned? And what is Treasury doing in order to ensure that such an occurrence is eradicated going forward? The last point, Chair, will be on the drawdowns on the contingency reserve. We see that there's a 9 billion which has been drawn down. So in terms of the windfall, so to speak, resulting from a spike in commodity prices, how much of this revenue would have been taken into contingency reserve, and how much is currently in the contingency reserve? So obviously, when we speak of the contingency reserve, we'll always have the July unrest in the back of our minds, the health of that fund in terms of assisting in closing the gap where it is required to help business rebuild, as well as entities like Sasria to be able to meet their claims obligations. Let me pause there, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in the discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Matafa. Any honorable member who wants to come in?
Yes, Chairperson Mlenzana.
Honorable Mlenzana, please come in.
Chair, let me just show face that at least I am a living human being, but allow me to switch off the video because my connectivity is very weak. Chairperson, it's just a few issues. I think just 3. Let me start by welcoming the presentation, of course, echoing what Honorable Matafa is saying. At least we are getting sharper and sharper in terms of our tools of analysis. Even your approach that when presentations are made, they should also take the form of being somehow educational, not only for us, but also for the the listeners, because these listeners are our electorate. Chair,
Recording in
it's
progress.
2 questions, but they may appear as if they are 3 or 4. My question is on the district development model.